scariest story you know that is true. In the 1930s, near my hometown, a man killed his wife, his mill and his 3 stepchildren, dismembered their bodies and hid them in the root cellar. My great-uncle and his father, my great-grandpa, were out hunting when their dog ran off barking. Uncle followed the dog and found a burlap bag. He opened it and found the head of one of the children. When he told us the story, he said he looked up and the man was standing right in front of him, another burlap bag in his hands. His dad arrived, scared the guy away, and they reported the head to the local cops, who found the rest of the victims and arrested the killer, who was executed hanged a couple months later. My uncle only told us the story once, but after he died, we found all the newspaper clippings about the murders in a trunk under his bed. I think it must have haunted him his entire life, especially since one of the kids was his age. It's a bit of local history I grew up hearing about, but didn't realize my great-uncle was the one who found the bodies until I was a teenager, because he simply never talked about it, except that one time, back in the 90s. A couple kids went missing. About 4-5 days later, my dad was fishing one night, thought he heard a gator, got his big Q-beam spotlight and pointed it toward the noise. It was a bloated dead body bobbing up and down in the water, eyes open and facing my dad. Turns out the kids had driven into the water by mistake, probably had been drinking. They found the other body a few hours later after my dad called it in. My dad was so traumatized that he never went night fishing again and honestly didn't fish much at all after that. In my early 20s, my wife and I had a goal of climbing all of the 14.0-foot peaks in Colorado. We would typically hike up a decent portion of the peak the night before, set up a tent and camp out and summit the next day. We were climbing Crestone Needle in August 2014 and set up camp before the tree line ended. We were in a remote wooded area near a creek that was raging pretty good at the time. No other campers around. No hikers seen going up or down. Super quiet and peaceful. We cooked dinner over the fire and went to bed early. I woke up around 1 a.m. with the hair standing up on the back of my neck. The only thing I could hear was the creek roaring and the wind blowing. I remember feeling really uneasy, which was unusual because we camped out a lot and were very used to being out in the wilderness. I decided to get up and exit the tent. Immediately upon stepping out of the tent, I saw the outline of a man about 50 yards from our campsite. He was just standing still, staring down at our camp. I yelled up at him, but didn't get a response. I poked my head into the tent to wake my wife up, and when I looked back for the man, he was gone. My wife and I talked about it and agreed that it was probably an early hiker who was starting their summit push early. Both of us felt uneasy, and neither of us were able to go back to sleep. I laid in the tent for about another 45 minutes wide awake. I decided to get back out of the tent to have a look around. I stepped out of the tent and walked around still feeling a little uneasy. Didn't see anything and still couldn't hear shit. Started going back towards my tent, and when I turned to my left, I saw the guy again. This time he was very close, maybe 20 feet or so from our tent, behind some brush. I yelled at him again and started running his direction. He took off and I lost sight of him. I got my wife out of the tent, we got all of our stuff packed up and we left. The 2 hours walk back to the car in the pitch black was honestly the most terrifying part of it all. Just now that someone wrote that the Snow Society, the Dyatlov Pass incident impacts me the most. A woman who took revenge for the murder of her son. It turns out that a guy who was driving drunk ran over a minor. His mother saw everything. She demanded and was on trial, but since there are incompetent authorities, the man was declared innocent. She wanted revenge, so she began to follow his every move. She already knew what he was doing, where and how. She decided that one day when this man was drunk, she was going to provoke him, and she did it. One day when the man was drunk, she seduced him. She convinced him to go to her house, and the guy entered her house, and taking advantage of the man's drunken state, she gagged him and tied him like a dog. Every day she hit him on the head, she gave him soup to eat. The days passed, and in one of those she told him that what he was eating was his daughter. When the man found out he no longer wanted to eat and vomited and begged for her death, she told him that if he wanted to die, he had to finish all of his daughter's soup, and so he did. After he finished that, she killed him with a hammer. More creepy and sad than scary, but when I was 5, my family and I moved into a semi-detached house in a cul-de-sac. Attached to our kitchen was my neighbor's garage. Relevant. When I got older, I came to find out that my neighbor's husband had been having an affair with the lady across the street. The only reason it came to light was because she got pregnant. And given she was a single mum, the other neighbors speculated. Anyway, the truth came out, and my neighbor made it known she'd be leaving him. While she was out one evening, he hung himself in their garage. She continued to live in that house for probably another 7 to 8 years, roughly. Their adult daughter visited pretty often too, and for almost 10 years, I watched the girl across the street grow up, and sometimes played with her when she got older, not knowing she was my immediate neighbor's husband's affair. Baby. It was also pretty eerie to think I was hanging out mere feet from where a guy killed himself. It happened just 5 weeks before we moved in. This happened 3 months ago, but a friend of mine bought a small house in a housing complex at the start of the year. She often heard her neighbor and his girlfriend arguing loudly, as did the other homes around them. One afternoon, she comes home from work to police and an ambulance in her cul-de-sac. She comes to find out that this neighbor had murdered his girlfriend. She tells the police she still heard him yelling 2 days prior. However, when the investigator came to officially interview her, he told her that the girlfriend had advanced decomposition to the extent that they couldn't get fingerprints from her. Keep in mind, this was in wintertime, which means he had been yelling at a corpse for a while. Scary part is the police still didn't arrest him, and he lived in the house until the girlfriend's brother evicted him since the home was in her name. My cousin died unexpectedly in 2016 of what we assume was an extremely aggressive cancer. He left behind his wife and 2 boys, aged 2 and a newborn. A couple years later, the wife entered a relationship with another guy who, by all accounts, was a stand-up character for both her and the boys. In 2021, the wife died of what everyone assumed was COVID. The boyfriend had her cremated extremely quickly and offered to take full custody of her sons. It soon came out that he had been abusing the boys physically and sexually. He skipped town. The boys were adopted by my cousin's relative, who brought them to see a child psychologist. When the therapist built enough rapport to ask the boys about the day their mother died, the boys proceeded to play act one person smothering another with a pillow. Meanwhile, the boyfriend was charged with the rape of a minor relative, but the trial was delayed on a technicality, and then dropped when the victim recanted. Last I heard, late 2021, he's an assistant pastor at church in New Hampshire. Edit, misspellings, added info. Update, his full name is Marshall Corrado. Possible middle name of Neil. It appears that he is now living in Southington, Connecticut. Previous associated address includes Laconia, NH, where all this originally happened. There is no current association with the church that I can find. Someone with the same name was scheduled to appear at the Belknap County Superior Court in January of this year, but no updates on legal status since that time. Update 2. Here's a YouTube video featuring him and his ex-wife on some religious podcast. Had it confirmed by a relative willing to talk about it. Update 3. The accuser has not recanted and a trial date has officially been set for September 22nd. The case of Clive Waring. He's a musician who contracted a virus that destroyed the part of his brain that forms new memories. He has anterograde amnesia, meaning his memory only lasts for about 7-30 seconds. He is constantly waking up for the first time every single moment of his life. He keeps a diary, and it's filled with entries minutes apart, each one saying something like 10:45 a.m., I am now awake, with all the previous entries crossed out because he has no memory of writing them. It's the true story of a man trapped in a never-ending moment, and the thought of that is scarier to me than any ghost story. This happened to me. While in college, I was working alone at a retail store in a shopping mall. I had closed shop for the day, and I was the only person in the store. I took some stuff to the stockback room, which also had a small card table with 4 chairs around it for meal breaks. I returned to the front of the store to continue closing up. I was out there for like 10 minutes. Then went to the back room to get my coat. When I stepped into the back room, all 4 of the chairs were facing the door in a perfectly straight line, several feet from where they should be at the table. These fucking chairs had moved and changed direction silently with no one else but me there. I NOP'd the fuck out, called Mal Security. They searched the store and found it empty. They said I probably moved the chairs and forgot. I never worked there alone again. There was this super eerie case in Lebanon involving a family of weirdos from a village called Kfar Shima. Neighbors had been whispering about them for years due to their reclusiveness and antisocial behavior. But it wasn't until last summer that the authorities broke into their property and found 5 dead bodies in different states of decay in a hidden locked room under the house. Turns out the eldest son had been quietly stashing his own deceased siblings and father down there since the 1980s, claiming it was a family ritual and that he was just fulfilling their wish to be buried at home, while some died of natural causes. One brother, George A.I. Fata, had been killed by another sibling, Khalil, during the Lebanese Civil War. Khalil took his own life in 2000, and a baby girl named Marie died at 1 year old for reasons that remain unknown. But it's rumored that one of the brothers had killed her out of jealousy. The eldest brother, Christo A.I. Fata, was living there with his senile, 90-year-old mother. He was arrested. The mother was sent to an elderly care facility and the bodies were finally given a proper burial. Such a creepy family, and the story was absolute nightmare fuel when it broke out. CO worker was almost a victim of murder-suicide. Her husband was holding a gun to her head, telling her he was killing her for her sake, as the world is so terrible. Standoff with police lasted long enough for her to get a chance to shove him away. He shot himself in the head before she even got far enough away to avoid the splatter. She had to quit her job after due to the PTSD and the fact that she was a nurse in a mental health ward. She also needed a police guard around her house for the next month due to writers read news jockeys kept trying to break in to get the story. After that, she changed her name in order to avoid talking about it. The only reason she told me is because she had to take a call at the call center we work in, not even remotely related to healthcare, where the woman on the other line was suicidal and couldn't get through to the suicide hotline. I was just trying to calm her down enough to drive home. You can wake up blind. Happened to me in 22. In short, I have a super rare disease called ASO. Best they can guess, my body's immune system attacked my eye's immune system. Yes, they're separate. And ate chunks of my retinas. It's still doing so, but not quite as vigorously as it did before I started seeing the results, which manifested as a sudden inability to see through my contacts or glasses. Anyways, I can still see a little bit out of half of one eye at a strength of -11.0, but I woke up like that after 38 years of seeing 20/10 with contacts or glasses. Was definitely hard to adjust to. Oh, and since autoimmune loves to travel in packs, I now also have eye and psoriatic arthritis, and my diabetes is getting worse. Why? I'm the queen of autoimmune. About 13 years ago, my sister came home from college for the summer. One day, she got a frantic phone call from one of her roommates. Turns out, these girls were not worried in the slightest about locking the doors to the house. This roommate was taking a shower, got out of the shower, and was drying off when she heard a noise coming from the vent directly above her. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight and pointed it up at the vent, and all she managed to see was an eyeball staring at her before she justifiably flipped out and sprinted out of the house in nothing but a towel. She called 911 and the police went into the attic and arrested a homeless man who had literally just been walking around checking for unlocked doors, allegedly. Then it all started to make sense why food was going missing, and the girls assumed someone was lying about taking food. I have zero clue how it was possible that this creature was looking through a vent, but it happened. Many years ago, on a road trip from LAA to San Francisco, husband and I stopped at a rest stop. We slept there for a couple of hours, and then when the sun rose, I went to use the restroom. Stepping inside, I noticed papers were taped to the mirror. I had to use the toilet really bad, so I just stepped into the stall. Washing my hands after, I looked up and read the paper on the mirror before me. It said, "If you want a good time, call 3020. Then it describes what he was capable of doing and how, and his extraordinary God-given attributes that would be used in the process. Then at the bottom of the paper, it said, "But if you don't want to call, I will be right outside the door, by the big tree, waiting for you." My heart just went cold and I froze. I don't want to move, and I am looking around to see if he is in the restroom, feeling stupid for not reading that paper before or checking the stalls. I just stood there and waited for what seemed eternity for my husband to notice that I was gone too long and come get me. It wasn't that long, but it felt that way. I ran out, grabbed my husband and went to the car. I looked back and sure enough, there was a guy by the tree just outside the door, exactly the way he described himself. The exterior part anyway, and he looked at me, then quickly looked away. This was way before cell phones, so there was no way for me to call police. Never again have I gone into a public bathroom and not checked. This might make me seem like a weirdo, but fuck it. So in my mid-20s, I started at a new company with a lovely boss lady. She was awesome, and soon feelings developed between the two of us. We started dating, obviously on the down low. She was early 40s, so a pretty good age gap. We dated for about 3 years, and I won't bore you with the details, but things did not work out. I did love her a lot though, and often think she might have been the one, if not for the age difference. I don't know, it might be a rose-colored glasses kind of thing. Anyways, a couple years later, I'm working at a different place. A small family business, not mine, that I funnily enough got with a stunning reference from my ex-lady friend. The business knew my ex because one of their relatives had dated her in high school. Small fucking world. One Saturday night, I'm sitting on my couch feeling sad and lonely and get the great idea to go through my old phone that is kept in a bag in my closet with all the other old tech. I know we all have these that are filled with iPods, iPhones, Blackberries, and 1,000 cables we're too afraid to throw out. So, I plug this phone into charge and start going through the messages. I stumble across the text chain between me and my ex. I start to reminisce. And sure enough, I find a PIC of her in her bra and think, well, that will do for the night. I know, pathetic. Monday morning arrives and I head into work. The office lady comes up to me and was like, "Hey, did you hear about Jessica? The fake name I'm giving my ex." And I was like, how the fuck did she know I was creeping? So I responded dumbly with Jessica from my old job, who I used to date, as if she didn't know who we were talking about. Haha. And she was like, yeah. Jessica passed away in her sleep on the weekend. The police found her on a wellness call after she didn't show up for work. I was stunned. I must have been looking at our old text convo either hours before she was going to die or possibly as she lay dead in her bed. I couldn't help myself and told this to the office lady. She told me shivers just ran up her spine. I have no idea why I chose that night, after 2 years, to go through my old phone and fixate on my ex. It was just something kinda calling me. A British family's neighbour kept insisting that the kids were yelling insults and heckling him when they were outside playing in the garden. Only the father immediately knows it's bullshit because the kids are too afraid of the neighbour to even go outside. When the father confronts the neighbour for his lies, the neighbour threatens him and expressly threatens the lives of the kids, the oldest no older than 6, making it clear that he'll teach those kids some manners. Naturally, the father calls the police. Here's where it gets worse. The neighbour's name was Harry Street, and when the police started investigating the threats, a junior officer noted that despite being close to his 70s, the incident took place in 2013. None of Harry's public records start until the mid-90s. Junior officer immediately realizes that Street is living not only under an assumed name, but an assumed name given to him by the government. This means he's an ex-con whose crimes were so notable that the police had to give him a fake name after his release for his own safety. But there are no clues to his former identity on his police records. Around the mid-90s is when they switch from paper records to computer databases, and sadly, it's not uncommon for some paper records to have not been transferred over to the databases due to human record. Luckily, they still kept the original paper records, just in case such a situation ever arose. She goes to the paper storage facility, tracks down Street's real criminal record, and calls the family in the middle of the night to warn them to get the fuck out of their house immediately, while also getting armed response to kick his door in, where they find an arsenal of handmade guns, ammo, and bombs. Harry Street was once known as Barry Williams, and as a result of psychotic and paranoid delusions caused by being an undiagnosed schizophrenic, Williams went on a spree killing provoked by his delusions in the 1970s. He was institutionalized for 20 years until he was determined to recognize the error of his ways and the need to self-manage his condition, but emigrated to Spain right after his release without letting the police know about his past. When he emigrated back to the UK a decade later, Williams had stopped taking his antipsychotic meds years ago, and his delusions were convincing him to go on another mass shooting. If not for that threat, or the junior officer realizing his cover identity was fake, he'd have murdered his neighbors just like when he started his first rampage. When I was 9, my grandma died of cancer. While she was on hospice at home, my grandpa was having an affair with another woman, probably months before she actually passed. Once she passed, he expected a large life insurance policy. But at some point, before my grandma got really sick, her twin sister took her to get the beneficiaries changed to their 3 children. At some point, his girlfriend decided she didn't want anything to do with him and left him. Shortly after, he found out that he wasn't a beneficiary on the life insurance, and he snapped. According to my grandma's twin sister, the girlfriend was in the process of getting a restraining order against him when he went to her house. Her 3 children, 2 nephews and mum were home, and he went on a murder spree. He killed the mum, her 2 youngest children, and her nephews. Her oldest son was able to get away and run to a neighbor's house to call the police. The article I read when I was older said the responding officers described it as one of the most horrific scenes they'd walked in on. My grandpa left and went on the run. I remember seeing pictures flashing of my family on the news. My grandma's twin sister, my family, and my aunt and uncle's family all had police stationed outside for a week while a nationwide manhunt for my grandpa ensued. No one knew where H'd go or what H'd do. Eventually, he went to my grandma's grave and proceeded to call his 3 children. I answered the phone when he called my mum. She talked to him for a few minutes and was crying on the floor when she hung up. She never told me what he said. He called my uncle last and spoke to him while he died. At my grandma's grave, a passerby called the police and SWAT came to capture him. While he was on the phone with my uncle, SWAT surrounding him. He slit his own throat on top of my grandma's grave. H told my uncle that H buried a few things of his at her grave, and my uncle eventually went back to find his wallet and a knife. I was really young when this all happened, but my family still doesn't talk about it. I see his picture in my MOMS house and it makes me shudder every time thinking how this man could just snap and take away so many lives, including children, similar ages to his own grandchildren. It's incredibly scary to think that some people are just a breakup or disappointment away from destroying so many lives. Back in 2006, when my oldest sister was moving to a new city for work, my parents and I helped apartment hunt for her. My sister found a really nice apartment in a nice locality, which was absolutely perfect on paper. The residents were all working women, the landlady seemed super nice to my sister, and the location and rent were ideal. The only thing left to do was for my parents to meet the landlady and finalize the documents. However, after my mum met the landlady for the first time, she told us that she had a weird feeling about her and asked us to keep apartment hunting. So that's what we did. Anyway, fast forward a year or so and we find out from the local newspaper that the landlady was into black magic and she had allegedly murdered some of the residents to use as sacrifices for her rituals. I wish I was lying. Till date, it is one of the most terrifying things I've read. Edit. So this incident happened in Bangalore in the year 2006 to 2007. I'm assuming the news coverage would have taken place in 2008 to 2009. I'm 100% sure this happened, but I'm unable to find a news article that talks about it, partially because there was another murder in a PG in 2024 and I can only find articles pertaining to that incident. I will keep looking for this, but if anyone else comes across this article, I'd like to see it as well. Apologies for not coming up with a source at the moment. In the 2000s, I worked for a residents' organisation on a council estate in South London housing project for us readers. It was poor, as you would expect, with high crime but a good community. The estate consisted of 5 high-rise tower blocks, with our office in the basement of one. The other basements were used for storage, and it was part of my job to check them regularly. They were big basements. The blocks were oblongs on their sides, rather than slim point blocks. The basements were dark with minimal lighting. Dark corners echoing and creepy. You get the picture. One of the residents of the estate told me they used to use the basements for their own storage, but back in the 80s, a 6-year-old child had gone missing on the estate, and after a frantic search, her body was found in the basement of one of the blocks. She'd been sexually assaulted and murdered. A homeless man was arrested and convicted. I can't remember if he'd been living down there or not. The man who told me was an elderly, long-time resident who was well respected. He said he could still remember the screams of her mother. I worked there for years and it would be mentioned every now and again by various older residents who always talked about the mother's screams. Obviously, this made checking that particular basement a bit creepy to say the least. Some staff wouldn't go down there at all. I had to leave hurriedly a few times after getting the fear, but never saw anything supernatural. I searched the internet at various points looking for evidence of the story, but could never found anything. Then a few years ago, suddenly there it was. Probably the result of a newspaper putting their archives online. It was exactly how I'd been told, and pretty horrifying. I'm 33 now, but when I was a teenager, my father was into some drugs and, as one would assume, had some pretty terrible people in his life. This one dude named Mike, I'm gonna use his real name, since he doesn't deserve the respect of anonymity, would come over every now and then to get dope, but he would always be super off-putting. Huge dude, like 6'4" and 380 to 400 pounds. Ragged and rough. Loose cannon type. The type that should not be around your kids. So one day my father comes home from work and seems a little off, which made my grandma ask what was wrong. He explained that Mike was in jail for killing someone. Come to find out the next day that Mike actually befriended this couple in a rural town about an hour away and would go to their house for side work when he needed money. They were fixtures in the community, and I think they owned a feed store, if I'm not mistaken. Well, he ended up going there in the middle of the night and got a hold of one of their guns, robbed them of their debit cards and extorted the pins, shot them both in the head with their own gun, and set the house on fire as an attempt to cover up the scene. He walked to a store nearby and used the ATM. Multiple people witnessed him walking on the highway between the burning house and the store. They caught him shortly after and he was sentenced to 118 years in prison after being convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and a couple other charges. In 1991, my brother's best friend B witnessed the murder of his family. B lived on an acreage with his grandparents, his cousin, and his uncle. It was during summer break and the uncle shot the grandparents and cousin, put the bodies on a brush pile to burn them, and then took B into town for ice cream. B was only 7 years old. We never saw him again and it really tore my brother up. We lived in a very rural, boring area, so it was a huge shock. Nothing like that had ever happened before. Until 2022, when a woman I'd gone to school with was murdered by her husband in an attempt to get her life insurance and also free himself up for the other secret relationship he had going. He tried to stage it as an accident, that she had been crushed by a round hay bale that fell off the tractor forks. But the investigators noted she had blunt force trauma to the head, inconsistent with his story. Even more fucked up is that they had a house fire a year prior that he claimed started when he was deep frying porridges at her but most people now suspect was his first attempt at murdering her. I heard this directly from this person. I used to work for a forensic psychologist and one of our clients was named Richard Farley. Richard Farley was a stalker back in the 80s, and when the girl he was stalking finally got a restraining order, he walked into her job and shot 11 people, killing 7 of them. She survived with 3 gunshot wounds. The scariest part was listening to him tell the story. His case was being reviewed because he was on death row, and they were trying to get it commuted to a life sentence, which incidentally he did not want. They were talking to him because he had been diagnosed with adult autism and they reopened his case to see if that had any bearing on his decision-making. Just listening to him recount the events with not one shred of remorse or sadness made my blood run cold. When my boss finally asked him how the victims' families felt because he killed them, and his answer was plain, his day. He just said, why would they miss them? They're just not here anymore. I believe they made a movie about him as well called The Stalking of Laura Black. Incidentally though, his case was the reason that there are stalking laws on the books. A stalker used to have to actually cross a physical plane for it to count. And once they have that case, they realized that people needed more protection because even without crossing a physical plane, he absolutely made this woman's life a living hell. I got to visit him at San Quentin with my boss. As soon as we walked in, she ordered the guards to take his shackles and handcuffs off and then asked them to leave the room because she said he wouldn't be upfront and honest if they were there. So basically, my boss and I were alone with a serial killer in a room in a jail. A different kind of horror story, but I had a post-traumatic manic episode about a year ago. And it is terrifying how quickly and severely your brain can turn on you. The episode manifested when I left my abusive ex-wife, was raped, and lost my job within 12 months of each other. For several months, my brain was in a constant state of either dissociation, sheer panic, suicidality, or an irresistible need to engage in risk-taking behaviors mostly related to substance use. The alcohol was the worst part of it. I'd drink so I could stop feeling my rapist, and it would work at first. But then, my brain would tell me drinking more would make me stop thinking about it too. So I'd drink more, and then I'd think about it more. And then my brain would tell me that more would actually make it go away. And so forth in the cycle. I isolated myself from almost everyone I loved, and it wasn't even intentional, I just couldn't pick up my phone. And getting notifications from it literally made me panic. I went through all of my savings in a matter of months, and almost all of it went to alcohol. weed, and cocaine. I knew, logically, during this time that I was absolutely destroying my life, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop, and my brain was just sick enough to remind me that it didn't matter how recklessly I was behaving, because ultimately I wasn't going to survive this. I very nearly became homeless and had to sell an expensive piece of artwork I'd inherited to rent a U-Haul and move back in with my dad in my home state, removing myself from an environment where I knew how to get the things that were destroying me, and having family look out for me is what finally pulled me out of that state, but a huge chunk of my memory during that time is just gone. To add one more piece to this before I leave it, I have 3 cats. One is very elderly and obsessed with me. One was abandoned by my ex-wife and clearly affected by it. She was supposed to keep her, but asked a friend to babysit her while she went on vacation and never returned for her. And my third one developed such serious separation anxiety when I left my wife that if I left for even a night, she'd overgroom until she was missing fur and had sores on her body. I was driving to do an odd job for someone, and considered driving off the cliffside in front of me. I thought of my cats and how terrified and sad and confused they'd be if I never came home, and the moment I realized I couldn't kill myself because of it was the single most horrific experience I'd ever had. Not that I wanted to kill myself, but that I couldn't. Again, not a traditional scary story, but I can think of few things more horrifying. My grandparents lived in Monterey Park, Los Angeles, when my mum was a kid. They lived there during the murder sprees committed by Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. My grandpa was a trucker who often found himself coming home late at night. He would typically crack himself a beer and watch TV at night before going to sleep. The living room was right in front of the front door. My grandpa says that late at night, he noticed the door jiggling like someone was trying to break in. He and my family were well aware of his spree at the time, and my grandpa didn't hesitate to grab his mystery muscatel from the closet, a 12-gram shotgun, and proceeded to chamber a round. Everyone knows the distinct sound of a shotgun being loaded. My grandpa locked and loaded one time and said the jiggling suddenly stopped, and after a while he was able to go to bed. I don't remember if he reported it to the police, but I think he did. It's crazy to think I may not exist had it not been for my grandpa. A few days later, the Night Stalker went after someone in Monterey Park. I know it could have been anyone trying to break in, but I truly think he was targeting my family and thought there were no men home as there are only daughters and mum, no sons. I work for a parks department as part of the maintenance team. It's not in the nicest district as drugs and gangs have taken a toll on the community. When I first started working this job, I would have to clean the bathrooms at our main park as the new guy. We show up to the parks around AM and it's still pretty dark out. Can make for a creepy scene sometimes. After a couple of months on the job, this shirtless, prison Jack Black dude started showing up every morning, like 5 minutes after I started cleaning the bathrooms, and always asked if the bathroom was open yet. I always replied that they would be done once I finished cleaning them. He was always pretty cool about it, but he gave me weird vibes. He would just stand by the door and do what looked like Tai Chi while I finished up. Made it awkward, especially if I had to go in and out of the bathroom to grab something. He'd walk right in front of him. His behavior got weirder and weirder until one morning he showed up completely naked and proceeded to do his morning Tai Chi. Chased him off from the park and told him not to come back, and I didn't see him for well over a month. He went on to murder an old lady, chop up her body and live in her house for weeks right across the street from another one of our parks. He was discovered because neighbors started complaining about the smell of decaying corpse. I climbed the ladder and I'm no longer the guy that cleans the bathroom. This one is from my parents. It was a summer night 2023 during a thunderstorm. They stayed in a one-room apartment on the first floor next to the road that led into the complex. After falling asleep at 9 at night, my mother woke up a couple hours later to see her closet light on. She just assumed it was my father doing whatever and tried to go back to sleep. The noise continued to come from the closet, and eventually she decided to ask, "What the heck are you doing in there?" Then, to her shock, my dad raised up from his slumber next to her in their bed, started frantically shouting at the intruder that he had a pistol and to get out. After no reply, he opened the closet door all the way to find a massive man who stood 6'4" with long soaked black hair covering his entire face with just a towel wrapped around his body. After this, finding this man, more frantic shouting happened, and he opened the sliding door and walked out into the thunderstorm. Cops were called and the arrest was made. It was a homeless man creeping to steal some dry clothes. He was released 6 months later. After my parents seen he was released, they decided to move to another town. The reason I find this story so creepy, though it doesn't involve dead bodies, thank God, it's how common it is to experience home intrusions and could happen to anyone at any time, and the sense of privacy that just disappears, that you never do know if a homeless mentally ill boogeyman may appear in your closet. Neighbor across the street divorced her husband a week into her pregnancy with his first child and moved away. He was extremely abusive, and an underground women's survivor group helped her fake her disappearance. She moved from shelter to shelter across 5 states before settling down with her father and met a new man. A year later, she gave birth to a beautiful little boy. She went out jogging with her new husband when her ex finally found her. He shot her new husband in the back twice, walked up and shot him in the head, then fired on her as she neared the front door, putting 3 bullets in her back. Then walked into her house after taking her keys and shot the grandfather in the head as he was holding the grandbaby. Proceeded to walk out and shoot her in the face after showing her the baby. He made it halfway down the driveway when the police showed up and arrested him, still holding the baby. He's on death row now and due for extradition to 2 other states for attempted murder of the women who sheltered her. He tracked her down for the entire year, ambushed and beat the women who hid her, and nearly killed 2 of them. The entire shooting incident started while I was sitting in my car in the morning, having just gotten back from the college campus for the weekend. I was on the phone with 911 as soon as I heard the first shot. Was told to stay in the car and just report what was happening from a safe location and not to engage. Officers were already on the way, just 2 streets down, dealing with a domestic disturbance call. The guy had gone there first because he saw his ex-wife talking to the neighbor and didn't have her exact address. Luckily, that guy survived the encounter with a few bruises.